Hey, good morning. This is Daniela Baker with Wisdom Wednesday, and we have Bret here rattling with us today. And I want to welcome here, Bret. How are you Well, it's morning for me, but afternoon for you.
I'm great. Thank you, Danielle. Nice to talk with you.
Yes. And on our Wisdom Wednesday, we have professionals coming in and talking about their career path, where did they started and their journey, where they are at, and sharing what they have learned and their wisdom with us. And again, I'm Daniela Baker, and my work is really working with people, mostly women in transitional career and personal life. And Bret is, so Bret, you created Adapt to Changes to help business owners and product owners adapt to successfully to inevitable changes that come their way. So you marketing, communication experience, including work with technology companies and the rapid changes that may disturb or disrupt companies. So can you tell us a little bit more adapt to changes, kind of like, what do you do on the ground and what kind of problems that companies bring to you?
Sure, Danielle. So once again, I'm Bret Rachlin, and I at the heart of my career, I'm really a communicator. That's the consistent theme, communications, for the last over 25 years since I graduated college in spring of '94. And Adapt to Changes is actually, it started as really kind of a side project while continuing to do marketing consulting, primarily for tech companies. And what Adapt to Changes is all about is really a culmination of, a lot of the experiences that I've had, as well as the experiences of my colleagues, the people I've worked for, and the people who've worked for me over the past 25 years, in terms of understanding just how impactful change and the ability or inability to adapt to those changes can be on your career or on your business. And what I found is that there are actually certain interesting things that you can do kind of to prepare yourself for when change happens so that you can adapt more effectively. And the other interesting thing is that the rate of change has, especially being in technology my whole career, has always been great, but it's nothing compared to what it's been over the past few years, especially in the world of marketing. Marketing is going through rapid changes on a consistent basis. The way our target buyers and audiences consume information changes constantly, new channels to communicate with them through. And it's relentless. And finding ways to stay in tune with those changes and do things differently can be really challenging for business owners, as well as people progressing through their careers.
Can you give us an example how it has, changed in the last few years? What are you doing different today than you did, let's say, 5 years ago or 7 years ago with marketing?
Well, a good example is something that let's take public relations for a second. There is a lot of new capabilities around artificial intelligence, or AI, in terms of how that's impacting the PR world. So in the past, if you were doing research in terms of for a company about whom they should target, reporters, analysts, et cetera, in terms of who are the people they should be pitching stories to get the word out about their businesses, a lot of that was a manual process. Now you have AI technology that can do that analysis much faster and in much greater detail than any one or multiple people can really do, and save you a lot of time to be able to determine who the best people are from a reporter's standpoint to be able to target. That is a dramatic change. And if you are competing against other companies or other PR people and you're doing it manually and others are using technology to help you do that, they're going to be far ahead in their capability to really focus on the right the right people to target, as well as giving themselves the best chances to get stories out there about them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Brett, how long has Adapt Changes been around?
Well, Adapt Changes is pretty new. It's right now we're really in the early stages of it. It's really been around for the past couple of years. Like I said, Adapt Changes is more of a side gig that I have while I'm doing marketing consulting. What's interesting is that I started getting it going before the pandemic. The pandemic just kind of represented more change that was going on and how people had to rapidly kind of change things around. But it's really in its early stages. But it's, like I said, it's kind of been a culmination of my entire career in terms of the observations I've had and the kind of the coaching practices that we focus on around, helping business owners or helping people through our content. Especially, we interview a lot of people to learn how they've adapted to changes, understanding about how to be open-minded, how you can practice resilience, and how you understand how your target buyers buy, including yourself as a buyer. Because when sometimes you have to affect change on yourself or your organization, and knowing that that's going to cause ripples in your organization, and that can be a big challenge, and one that people might not want to take. But if they don't take make that change, they're going to fall behind and potentially lose customers or lose the ability to market themselves for their careers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, how did you start? Like, where did you start? What was your first job? Did you go to college?
So I started in public relations right out of college back in the mid 1990s, and worked for two agencies over about a 5.5 year span. And we primarily focused on technology companies, a lot of software companies, a lot of telecommunications companies. And this was at the really early stages when the internet was just exploding. So it was a really exciting time to be in technology. And it was a very fast-paced environment, and was a constant change. I mean, we went from, when I started, we were pitching stories primarily via phone and still mailing press releases to reporters. That was quickly replaced, certainly with email, that we were using to communicate and, pitching stories via email. But that was my first role. And that really gave me the opportunity to really learn how to move things forward. I was quickly leading, teams of other PR people to kind of accomplish, a great number of activities for our clients in terms of helping them get the editorial coverage that was going to generate the market awareness and the air cover for them to have the credibility to win new business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, like, when you're 16, 17, was that what you're thinking about doing? Were you getting into it?
Yeah.
Or?
Now, I come from a family where, I have a couple. My father was an engineer. My older brother was an engineer. I think my other brother, my father certainly wanted him to be an engineer. Kind of that you're either an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. I had no interest in engineering or being a doctor. And because I like to argue, I was told I should be a lawyer. And I was a political science major in college. There's a lot more to law than just arguing. And I kind of, recognized in college that I was, I could have gone down the road. I did an internship in Congress, and I did an internship for the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, which really does all the events to promote the city of Philadelphia. Every city has a Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I recognized that I was not cut out for, working in government. There was too much waste of time and effort and money. Business was definitely a place that I would preferred. And it was something that was really interesting to me about being able to craft a story on behalf of an entity, whether it's your client or a business or the city of Philadelphia, and get people excited about that. And that's going to help drive business. That was a really interesting way of driving business versus kind of a traditional sales way, where sales is kind of out, doing outreach, trying to push products on you. And sales is radically different now. Sales is about delivering value and really resonating with your target prospect and customer. But in the past, salespeople had all the information. Now salespeople, your buyers have all the information. But PR was a way, and communications was a way to drive people to you and make that sale far easier. The sales could practically be won just based on the good story that you're telling, and through that communication. That was intriguing to me.
And so what was your major in college?
So I majored in political science with a minor in communications.
I see.
Now, political science, a lot of people would say that has really no necessarily direct connection to public relations or marketing. However, that's really incorrect. I mean, to get a good grade in college, you were essentially making an argument, and either writing a paper or giving a speech and convincing people that your argument was correct. And that's essentially what you're doing in marketing. You're making an argument on behalf of your product or service and asking people to believe you based on the credibility that you are demonstrating. Are you able to show that you have customers that are using your services or using that product? Are they happy with it? What's the problem that you're solving? But you're making an argument. So political science was actually a great area of study to prepare for a marketing and communications career.
And so how did you get it? I was just interviewing somebody the other day, and just talked Adam Provost, actually, and he was telling me that his first job was through newspaper classifieds. That's how he got it. How was your first job? How did you get your first job out of college? Was through...
So I got my first... Go ahead.
I was thinking introduction by somebody, or,
That's exactly right. I mean, I definitely was, my network has been very helpful for me throughout my entire career. And I was able to get an internship with a PR firm through one of my friends from Vanderbilt, where I went to college, who was actually several years older than I was. He was a fraternity brother of mine, but he was an alumni even before I started. He happened to live in Atlanta, and he was able to introduce me, to this firm. And I interned there for a few weeks. I wound up connecting with somebody else and getting a job with another firm for a year, and then came back to the prior firm, the first firm, and worked there for 4.5 years. And that was really that 4.5-year job was really my first role. I mean, I had the other one for a year, and that gave me some great learnings. But it was really that second role that really propelled the rest of my career.
Bret, what do you love about your job?
So what I really love about my job is really the strategic aspect of it. I really like thinking through, each client that we have has a unique set of value that they offer their customers and prospects. And thinking through the best way to reach them and how you're going to engage and how you're going to resonate with them is really interesting to me. But also thinking through how are you packaging that? How are you differentiating from, most companies have a slew of competitors. There are the differentiators that companies talk about often aren't really differentiators. How are you packaging something up to really look different? How are you delivering value in a creative way that's going to help attract the attention to help you grow your business? So it's really focusing on the strategy and then working with team members to kind of execute the tactics to support those strategies. But the other part of it, especially as it relates to adaptive changes, is having a consistent focus of curiosity. And that's really where being open-minded and being resilient, comes from, because you have to be open to be creative and to be able to have creative strategy. You have to be open to doing new things. And there's a lot of risk when doing something new. And so that's part of what, adaptive changes is about, is how are you being open-minded in your life on a regular basis? How are you trying new things? And then the second part of that is from a resilience standpoint. A lot of people will talk about resilience with regards to going through some traumatic event. And certainly, that is certainly a way of building resilience. But if you think about a baby, especially a toddler who's learning to walk, that babies experience, tremendous amount of resilience just by crawling, standing, falling, crawling, standing, falling over and over again. We kind of lose that through our lives. We get very comfortable with what we're doing, and that creates a lot of complacency that makes it hard for us to change. So one way to kind of build that resiliency, just one example would be try eating with your opposite hand. I had a pretty significant bike accident about 9 years ago where I dislocated my right elbow and broke my right arm. And for 6 weeks, I was shaving and eating with my left hand, which is incredibly frustrating. But you do what you have to do. And that certainly, once you have the confidence that you can get through it, that translates into other things. And it's important. So that's that part of my job of helping companies think through doing things differently, getting them to open up and doing creative strategies to really grow their businesses is probably what's most interesting to me about, and what I like most about my job.
Mm-hmm. Brett, can you share with us like a successful moment where you went into, a conversation with a company that was resistant to that creative or challenging part of like opening up and, and doing something differently. And then you show them the path and they were actually grateful that they did actually do something different because they were so successful by doing it.
Yeah, sure. So one example of that is that when I moved from working in an agency to working for a software company directly, going corporate, I had a role doing competitive and market analysis, and I was taking over the role from a person who was moving on to another company who I actually knew, who was a former reporter that I'd worked with from that standpoint at a tech publication, and very, very accomplished at what he did. So it was kind of a tall order taking over for him in this role. And my audience in that role was the sales team, but I reported obviously in through marketing. And there was a specific way that he did that role, and I had to kind of come in and make it my own. And I had to learn the role too at the same time, learn the technology, learn who the competitors are, learn how we were doing business. And it was an opportunity to kind of come in and start working kind of in a similar fashion to the way he was doing it, kind of just get comfortable doing it that way. But I quickly realized, based on the research I was doing and some of the conferences I was attending to just grow in that role, that we needed to be doing different activities. And so, for example, we really needed to move away from gathering competitive intelligence at trade shows, for example, and really find ways to work with our sales teams to get more information and aggregate that information across the organization in a more effective way. And so being able to communicate that to the people I was working for and getting them on board with that was something we were able to start producing, just a far greater amount of valuable competitive intelligence that was going to ultimately help us win business against a few direct competitors through that way. So we were able to, but it took some convincing because you only had so much time, and I was kind of a single contributor in that role. But it was, ultimately, after over 5 years of time, we really had changed that role and what the focus of it was, and we're delivering greater value to our target audience, the salespeople, and we were winning more business because of it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And early on, you talked about, that resilience about the toddler getting up and, trying again. And so as an entrepreneur, and we have, a lot of our young professionals going to business for themselves nowadays, or being contractors, or even applying for jobs, like when getting a no, thank you, or maybe later. How emotionally to recover from that? Because, when you're at the beginning of a business or building a business or even applying for a job just out of college, and getting so many no's sometimes can be a little disheartening. So what is that is needed to kind of get up and try again, and not just like, okay, I'm not cut out for this, I don't want to do it anymore, or just kind of, I'm going to go back to watch Netflix and forget about, you know.
Yeah, I got it. No, it is hard. And by the way, that's similar to, my starting my career in public relations. We were pitching stories and we got a lot of no's, and you had to go pitch a lot of different publications until you could get a yes, or you had to be persistent. Sometimes you were being ignored until you finally were able to connect with that reporter. It's very, very challenging. I mean, everybody's really doing sales in some capacity in your career. I mean, you're always, whether you're in, even if you're comfortable in your current role, you're going to be looking for something new at some point, and you need to be thinking about that kind of, who are the people I need to be connecting with to be able to help me get my next role. And it's, you need to be you have to be thick skinned. But I also say, you got to kind of think like you're a field goal kicker in football. Okay. Field goal kickers, the best field goal kickers are ones with really short memories. When they miss a kick, they move on to the next kick. Okay. They cannot, the next time they're kicking a field goal, they cannot be thinking about that previous kick. Now that doesn't mean they can't learn from their mistakes. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be practicing. They shouldn't be altering things if they have trouble, kicking field goals, for example, in the wind. They need to practice that. But they cannot belabor the missed kicks. Similarly, you cannot belabor the no's that are happening to you. No's happen to you for any number of reasons that have really nothing to do with you. Now, there are certainly times where you have a bad pitch, you say the wrong thing, you're not compelling enough. Certainly there's things that you can hone, but many times it has nothing to do with you. The person's too busy at that time. They're having a bad day. They're ignoring you because they're distracted. There's so many different things that could go into that. Thinking about it where it's not about you is, I think, a really helpful way. The other component, though, too, is you have to have an interest in what you're doing. I just read a book called, I'm trying to think of who the author is off the top of my head. It was called Grit. It was like 6 or 7 months ago. It's written by, I think, a University of Pennsylvania psychology professor, Angie, I believe is her first name. Angela Duckworth, maybe, I think might be the name of the author. Anyway, great book. But what's interesting about grit is that, and you have to have grit to answer your question. However, one of the interesting things is you have to have an interest to also have grit. It's much harder to have grit to stick to something if you don't have the interest in that. So, for example, if you're applying to jobs and you're getting a lot of no's and you don't have an interest really in doing that job, you should look for a different line of work. But if that's your passion and that's where you really have the skill set to do it, you just have to keep plowing through to pursue that role, and you will ultimately be able to convince somebody for that. You have to have that belief that that's going to happen for you, and that certainly has happened for me. I've had to look for roles in my career. Again, my strategy has typically been to have as few no's as possible. In fact, I don't even like to apply for jobs. My thing was, who do I know and how can they help me find the next role? I look for that with new business. I mean, I want to short circuit everything. My parents used to say I was a big fan as a kid of taking the easy way out. I think at 48 years old, I think I still am. Why would you want to do extra work? I want to do quality work, and I want to work smart. I don't want to work stupidly. So my easy way out is, who do I know? How can I help get an easy, warm intro? I want a warm introduction to have that happen. But you have to have an interest, and you have to have a short memory, and know that it's not about you. They are saying no. You need to move on to somebody who's going to value you for the value that you have. And everybody brings a lot of value to the roles that they are building a career in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that it's really helpful that, they're not saying it to you at that moment, and in 6 months might be a different moment, correct?
That's right. And one example, in fact, I had when I did first move here, and again, the job process when I was 21 years old is different than it is today, obviously. I was essentially going down a list of PR firms, making phone calls from my couch when I moved here in July of 1994. One of those calls was to a head of a very small firm, and he yelled at me on the phone. He told me that I couldn't do PR if I wasn't a reporter first, and I had to go work for a paper. And he's not entirely wrong in the sense that at that time, a lot of PR people came from being journalists. However, that's not the only path that you can do. And I don't think really yelling at me on the phone was really that helpful for me. And maybe it's because I'm from Philadelphia and I've been yelled at before and I'm kind of used to that. It really didn't deter me very much, but it was not helpful for him to do that. But the bottom line is that there was a list of lots of other firms. So after I got off the phone with him, I just had to call, grin and bear it and call the next one. And granted, I ultimately got my internship through somebody I knew. But I feel like even if I hadn't used that connection, I was getting opportunities for interviews. I think I would have landed that entry-level role at some point, even without a warm introduction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, that is funny. And is it still like that with PR? I believe not, right?
Well, now, it's funny you say that because this is now 10 years ago. I was helping somebody who had just graduated, who was moving to Atlanta, and I'm connected with a senior level person at a major PR firm in town, and I was talking to him about it, and he was saying just how many more applicants there are for roles compared to what it was when I had graduated, and it was pretty busy then. I think you fast forward 10 years now, it's very, very competitive to get those roles. Now, one difference is that it would be really hard for me to get an entry-level PR role now based on what I did in college with my political science major and communications minor. Other than my internship in Philadelphia, I didn't have any practical PR experience. I never took a class where I learned how to write a press release. I didn't take a class about media relations, and I didn't have any graphic design capability. So if you are going to school, let's say, I'm in Atlanta at University of Georgia, their journalism school, and you take PR classes, you're getting practical experience there. You're learning how to do some graphic design work. So you're using social media and you can post things. You're having a collection of activities and experiences that you come out much more well-rounded than a lot of the PR people came out. We basically had to know how to write and speak clearly. And if you could do that, you could land yourself a role and then find yourself to success. Now you've got to be able to use marketing technology applications. You've got to be able to, again, start using some of the, not necessarily artificial intelligence, but certainly be very familiar with lots of different types of technology, lots of email marketing, for example. If you're doing a general marketing PR type role, you have to have those capabilities as the standard before you even have an interview.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Bret, you also mentioned early on, a little bit earlier, about networking. Like this is, it's a strength to have, especially if you don't like to get too many no's, you go through your network. So how do you keep, I'm asking because I just find with the amount of social media and LinkedIn, and I have to be honest with you, there people that I am linked in LinkedIn that I don't know who they are, so just like, how do you keep that network going and alive where you don't feel embarrassed to call somebody 5 years later or 10 years later because you saw they're connected to the next job that you want to get?
So there's a combination of things. And by the way, social media can be very helpful as part of the networking process. If you are comfortable posting things on a regular basis that is helping to build your reputation, I highly advocate for that. Now, that's something that I do not do a lot of myself because I actually, as being in marketing, I do find some social media very challenging. I've been part of social media since the beginning and I've used it to great success. I wrote when I was heading marketing for a company in the school security space, I wrote a school security blog. We were using social media to amplify that, and we were getting a lot of PR coverage because of it. However, social media can be depressing. I mean, just looking at it and trying to engage there on a regular basis. I'm not most people who know me would not find me to be a sad or depressed person, but it's just in itself depressing looking at anything, whether including LinkedIn. I mean, it's just hard to scroll through and just not sometimes feel bad about yourself because you see how well all of these people are doing, even though it may be a facade. But it is a great way to build your reputation. So building your reputation is important. But the other part of that, but the real key to networking, and this goes to whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, it's really about delivering value. Okay. And you can do a really great job of networking by being able to just stay in touch with people as you grow your career. Now, obviously, when you're starting your career, you have to start building a network from scratch. You have your friends, you have your acquaintances from college, you have your colleagues in your first job, and that's a great place to start. And obviously, using something like LinkedIn to keep up with those people, is really important. And that helps you kind of prioritize, who do I want to keep up with and how do I want to communicate with them? I've gone through stages of my career where I've actively sent emails on a semi-regular basis to a kind of a peer group. I try to connect with somebody once a quarter, or maybe it might just be once a year. Just have a mental note of who, I haven't talked to them in a while. What can I send them? But it's not sending them anything for me. I'm not sending them hey, can you help me with this or help me with that? I think about, okay, you're in this sort of role. Let me send you an article that may help you be better at your job. Or let me send you just a quick email saying, hey, how's it going? Is there anything I can help you with? It could be any number of things, but if you're delivering value for them, they're going to remember you in a positive way, especially if it ever comes to a point where you say, hey, can you help me with something? So I don't know what the right ratio is, but certainly if you are out trying to help people from a 5, 6, 7 to 1 ratio, where you're helping them 5, 6, or 7 times before you even ask for help yourself, that's a great way to network. And you can practically do that without LinkedIn. However, LinkedIn's a great complement to that because you can really see, where people are and which people you really want to focus on connecting with on a regular basis, kind of to stay in touch. That's going to help you for your career or your business or whatever you're trying to ultimately pursue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, a very good tip. I like that, just to, keep sending them. And then one day when you need a professional contact, you can just kind of reach out and, we won't feel embarrassing.
That's right. And when the job I got that I was telling you about earlier, when I moved from the PR agency to working at a software company doing competitive and market analysis, I got that essentially from the way I just talked to you about it. I was not looking for that role. I was essentially, for one of my other clients, I was tracking keywords to just look at news articles that related to that particular client. And it just so happened that those keywords also related to the company I was eventually going to work for. I knew people at that company because they were former clients of mine. So when a story came out about them, I used to just send them the article and say, hey, I just saw that, you're in this article or your company's in this article. That kept me in front of them probably for a good 2 years, so that when that individual was leaving the role of competitive market analysis, my future boss called me. I had lunch with him. I thought I was doing a new business meeting for my agency, let alone he was asking me to basically, he's recruiting me for that company. And I never even saw the office before starting on my first day because it was all the way across town. And because I had a good reputation and he knew me a little bit from before, and we had a couple of good lunches, he hired me without really ever having to come to the office. A lot of it was based on the fact that I was communicating with him for 2 years with nothing but help. There was nothing in it for me. It ended up being beneficial to me. But that's the easiest job I ever got. And I mean, I wish I could replicate that in the future, or getting business. I probably have gotten one consulting business that way too, but nothing has been as easy as that. It was like a 2-week process and I had a new role with a lot more money, by the way, too.
That's always a nice gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how about mentors? Did you have mentors along the way, Bret? People that help
Absolutely.
you?
You know, I can go back to, college, in terms of having a communications professor that I was pretty close to. Again, through networking, it was his cousin that I worked for in Philadelphia for my internship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'd say that his cousin had a woman working for him who was really my direct, boss in that internship. She was my main, reference for my role here, my first job here in Atlanta. And, so, she was certainly a mentor, and I definitely would consider those early people that I worked for mentors throughout my career. And it was, I was fortunate to work for some really smart people who were very open and kind to be able to take the time just to answer my questions. But mentorship's a two-way street. Mentors, because I think I've been a mentor for several people throughout my career as well, and I enjoy doing that. The person who's being mentored needs to put some time in and some effort. They have to show interest to the person that they are asking for help from or getting input from. So it's really communications is a two-way process, and mentorship is as well. But that was very helpful for me early in my career. But I would certainly feel comfortable asking any of them today, questions or comments. I think my mentors have kind of changed over the years depending on what my interests are in. But it's definitely been very helpful to kind of follow people and certainly learn from them. Again, it goes back to that curiosity. How did you do something? Why were you successful? What do I need to look out for? Those are really helpful things.
And we are nearing the end of our time together here. However, I want to ask you, now that you have the hindsight, Vision 2020, like what was one of the lessons that you learned, either by being successful or by making a mistake, or, some obstacle that you overcame, and that is just, that became wisdom to you throughout your career path?
Yeah, the biggest lesson that I have looking back, and this would apply to anybody who's looking at this, especially if they're younger in their career, is that, is to take more risks. I certainly took some risks. I mean, but I do feel that the risks I took when I was younger, maybe risks to some people. I moved to Atlanta from Philadelphia after college without a job. I had a roommate. I had a limited amount of funds to figure out to get a job, or I would have had to get a different job before I got my first real job. Some people would say that's a risk. That really wasn't that risky. I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. I mean, I only had myself to worry about. It wasn't that big a deal. But in terms of especially in your career, being able to go out on a limb and be a contrarian, and being able to say, this is the status quo. This is the way things have always been done. Let's do something new. Let's do something different. I look back, I was always successful, or even if I failed at saying that, even if it didn't work, I was kind of rewarded for at least taking that risk. People were appreciative of the fact that you were thinking about doing something differently from the way it was always done before. Certainly there was, you're going to have some conflict there. People, we said at the beginning, people are very comfortable with what they're doing. They don't want to change. But if I had to do it all over again, I would take more risks, because the downside really is pretty low, but the upside can be much greater. The ability to be able to earn more, to be able to grow in your career faster, take on the roles that you really want to take on. You're only going to get there by taking risks. And I'm not talking financial risks. I mean, there's certainly an angle that you may, if you're an entrepreneur, that you need to take a financial risk, and you need to, I think that obviously some of the most successful people took the biggest risks. I'm not necessarily advocating that. You have to feel comfortable with where you are, but you can probably take on more risk as a young person than you think you can. It's similar to running. I've run a couple marathons. I've run a lot of half marathons, which is also another thing I think that's helped me kind of adapt to changes, and have kind of the grit. You can get through something that's really, really hard. There's an old saying that you can always run kind of double the amount of miles that you think you can run. So if you think you can run 5 miles, or you're trying to run 5, you probably could gut it out and run 10. It's the same thing with risk. You probably take on more risk, and it's going to benefit you in the long run, because you're going to be ahead of your competitors, your other colleagues or whomever you're potentially, competing with in terms of for roles in your organization or other organizations. And, companies and people reward people who take risks that are ultimately successful. Noted, not all of them are going to be successful, but some are, and you only need some to work to make it really worthwhile.
So basically, don't be afraid. Try one more.
That's right. And that also goes back, taking risks, by the way, means adapting to changes. Doing something in a different way, you need to be comfortable with that change, and you need to be open-minded. You need to be curious, and then you need to have that resilience when it doesn't work, or you have to try it again, or you have to get other people to do it. Accountability, especially for business owners, is critical, because it's not just about, saying there's going to be a change. Are your team members actually working on that? There's tons of failures of new technology implementations because people just didn't want to change the way they were doing things. And you have to work all aspects of that. And that's the only way you can grow, is through adapting to changes.
So this past year of 2020, with all that, all the surprises that came our way, what have been the changes that you already seen in 1 year?
So one of the biggest changes is just how comfortable now, I was doing a lot of Zoom calls before. I mean, I worked in an office, but we had a remote teams across the country. But our clients were really rarely in our offices. So most of our client calls were either on the phone or on a Zoom call like this. So that in itself wasn't a big change. But the big change that I've seen in terms of now the openness to have kind of new business calls or more strategy sessions remotely, which allows you kind of to take more opportunities to have those conversations. So for example, if there's a new business meeting that is going to you have to go meet with somebody in person. And let's say you have to go to their office and you may have to dress up a little bit more. You may need to, you're going to have to drive. You got to coordinate schedules. Multiple people are going to be there. That new business opportunity really needs to be worth it for you to take 2-3 hours out of your day to go make that happen. And I certainly have taken plenty of those meetings over the past several years prior to the pandemic, where that meeting didn't lead to anything. And you kind of had to do it that way. And I got very careful and choosy. Is this worth my time or my team members' time to go through that effort? What's great now is that you still have to be careful with your time. But if you're going to have an hour session at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon and you're doing it remotely, you can be a lot less choosy and try some things out and say, oh yeah, I'll take that call. Let's have that new business opportunity. Let's have that call. So you have an opportunity to interact with a lot more people now because people are more comfortable doing remote calls like this. And I think that is a really nice change that's occurred. So it promotes more interactions, but less risk in a lot of ways of wasting your time if they're not going to work. So you end up with potentially much more opportunities. So I really like that change, that we're more comfortable having these types of conversations where there's not as much effort on everybody's part, at least to start the relationship.
Yes. And, how much more casual it is too. You have seen my husband walking around here.
Exactly. And we're comfortable with it. I have clients that have cats walking over their keyboard, dogs, certainly barking in the background, babies, kids, all of that, occurs, throughout our days these days, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Like you're trying to find a quiet space where you're not going to be interrupted. And suddenly it's just like these magnets, people coming, and going. So for one more question, Bret, on a more personal level, I'm just thinking back about your family, and you're saying, brothers in engineering, your father engineer. So the expectation of the family of engineer or doctor or lawyer, and were your parents or your father very disappointed that you're going a different way, or how did you deal with that?
Well, first of all, part of the reason for that is, so my father was it was the second family. Like my father's first wife had passed away, and then he married my mom, and they had me. So he was 52 when I was born. And he was, born in 1920. So he vividly remembers the Great Depression of the 30s. So his perception was about getting a job or a career that was really depression proof. So in his opinion, being an engineer, doctor, or a lawyer, those were all depression proof. Of course, they're not. Okay. And I have found out later, and he had a really neat career. He worked for 30 years for GE, but he got to work on the Apollo program in the 60s in Houston, helping to put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And so I have found out later that when the Apollo program was ending, he was potentially out of a job. He got back from Houston back to Philadelphia and got a job, but it wasn't the easiest way, so engineers he was actually about my age at that time. He was 49, 50 years old when he had to make that transition. So his perception is that he didn't want me to struggle in my career, and he wanted me to be able to have a profession and always being able to make money. Now, so I think he didn't really understand PR when I was, started to go into public relations. I think he understood marketing better. He did not really understand sales from especially from a technology sales perspective. He certainly knew what that was. He was a smart guy, but I don't think he appreciated the value that those salespeople would bring. So he wasn't disappointed. I think he was just concerned and maybe a little bit confused, but he lived long enough, all the way to 2011. I had been in my career at that point, almost 17 years. I had established myself. He knew I was, in a good spot. So I think it all worked out. My mom, by the way, was an actress, an English teacher, and a journalist. So she comes from more of the creative side of things, which is probably where I get a lot of the creativity to kind of do the creative marketing activities that I want to do. So she was more comfortable with it. But she still, I think, probably preferred those other things because it was all a lot about kind of very narrow thinking about those types of careers. They didn't have kind of the access to think about where careers were going. It was more looking backward versus forward. And I know with my kids, my wife has done, sponsorship and entertainment marketing through her career. And my kids are now both in high school. I try to think about where are the jobs going? Where are the things that you're interested in going? Knowing that the future is unknown. And you can't really look back and say what you should be doing based on the past, because again, things are changing so quickly. So it's a very interesting kind of dynamic from the way my parents interacted with me and now how I'm interacting with my kids because of what I learned from that. But overall, it all worked out, but it was definitely, I'm sure it was an education process for them to get them comfortable with my roles in marketing and PR.
I bet. And from the parent perspective, I'm a parent myself. You wanted the best for your children, right? You think
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the other thing, though, and this is, I know we have to wrap up soon, is play to your strengths. I think there is a lot of, even when I was early in my career, I had some people that I worked for that really wanted to focus on my weaknesses and how to make those weaknesses better. And certainly you have to make some weaknesses, better. But to really succeed in your career, you really want to focus on where you are strong and where you can become stronger, because that's ultimately what's going to be, people are going to reward you for that. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, not only as an employee or in your career, but also if you're a business owner, you want to be playing to your strengths. And certainly as a parent, I think we want to be looking at our kids and what their strengths are and encouraging them to figure out how they can align their strengths where there's a need in the marketplace so they can have a successful career that way, rather than just pushing them into a career because there's a need there if that doesn't match up with the strengths that they have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is that is a very good point. I was just listening with NPR, Terry Gross, interviewing Seth Rogen, and
Yes.
it's a great interview. And I'm going to check out the book Grit as well. Now you picked my interest. But it was a great interview because he dropped out of high school. He didn't have the attention span. He had some mental health challenges that didn't allow him to go into high school. However, he had the drive to keep pursuing things that he loved. What you talked about, it's important to love what you do, because that will give you the stamina, to keep running that marathon. How, like 27 miles?
26.2. That's exactly right. Yeah. We don't need more than 26.2 at that point. So 27 seems a little far at this point, but that's exactly right, Daniela.
Yeah, it's just like, what is going to keep you going at that, 25 and a half miles,
right. But you have to, and that's why I think Seth Rogen's point is you have to have, and this goes back to the grit book, you have to have the interest there. I don't think he would be successful and that stick-to-itiveness if he hadn't had the interest of doing what he was doing.
Right. Yeah. I have teenagers, and I'm like, I don't know if I wanted them to, to listen to that interview, which I did with my 14-year-old son. But it's really is like he did not just sat on the couch and watched Netflix. He was actually going after what he loved, not the traditional way, which works for some people, but don't work for everybody. So it's the same with your, going to PR rather than engineer, because you're going to be much more successful as a PR person than as an engineer because of your interest.
Exactly. Couldn't agree with it more.
So, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate our time together today and all the wisdom that you imparted with us. Thank you so much. And again, I'm going to look at that book, Grit.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
So again, thank you so much. I am Daniela Baker with Career Up Now, Wisdom Wednesday, interviewing seasonal professionals that have the wisdom to impart with us. And I help women transition careers and their personal life. And yeah, that's what I love to do. You take good care and have a good day.